Lepo pozdravljeni v ad hocu na kino Otoku. Tukaj v kulturnem domu v Izoli smo ujeli režiserja Benjamina Deboosereja, ki je naredil film z izjemno dolgim naslovom, naj ga preberem celega, Življenje in nenavadne prigode Robinsona Crusoeja, ki je 28 let živel povsem sam na naseljenem otoku in pravil, da je njegov. Benjamin, hello.
Hello.
So you have quite a long title there. Is it that you wanted to say what you're going to say in the film already in your title?
Actually, the title of the original book is longer, so I thought I'll do a shorter title than that one of the book.
So you're like a fan of Robinson Crusoe since you were little? You were reading the book for 10 times or more or something?
I would say it's changed a bit. So as a child, I got this book read, as many people did, in the form of a children's story. And then when I reread it a couple years before I made a film, I was quite shocked by how badly it is written, like how badly the storytelling is, how clumsy the title is actually, because it was this really long title, but also how racist the book is, how colonial it is. And then I went into some research, like we always do when we make a film. And yeah, I found more out about how the story came to be and how it came to be so popular. And actually, the writer, Daniel Defoe, he was invested in a colonial project in South America. And he wanted to write a book to promote his investments. And so he came up with this story, which was already quite popular at the time, these shipwreck stories. They were already being told. And so he thought, I'll take one of these shipwreck stories and pretend it to be a diary and say that I just found this story and it's real, and I put it out there. And so he published this fake book for his political motivations. And it ended up being more successful and making him more money than his colonial investment, because he wasn't the only one that could benefit from such a book. There were at the time many people with money that had these colonial investments, and to which this book was instrumental. And that's how it became one of the most translated books in the world. Like translated because it was also given to the colonized people to sort of show them what their role is.
Well, some say it's a book about a Renaissance man that can do like everything he wants at the moment when he comes to this deserted island. But you're saying you're looking now through modern eyes.
I wouldn't say these are modern eyes, because back at the time there was already protests. People have been protesting since the beginning of colonial times. Maybe the protest was just like, the saying is, history is always told by the winners. So the protest was just not present among the people, because people were working, people were doing their things, and the intellectuals who often belong to the elite, they could tell the stories in the way they saw them. But protest was already present. These visions on slavery were already present from the beginning of times. Yeah.
So what you did with your film is sort of you decolonized Robinson Crusoe. Was that your intention?
My intention was, I had this story read to me as a child. Unknowingly, I got these cultural ideas, these representations, and this happens actually all the time with stories we see. And so at a later age, and also being busy with film, I got more conscious about representations and what it means to portray somebody in a certain way. And so it made me quite angry to see this story and to know that I got this story read with this idea of like, I have progressive parents, or why did they give me this story, or things like this would pop up. And so my idea was like, okay, this story is clearly not just disappearing. It's 300 years old. It's still there. So what do we do with this culture, these parts of our culture? How do we approach this And so I decided to put my anger into humor and to look at like what are actually all these representations within this story. So it talks about imperialism, capitalism, colonialism, racism, how we exploit nature, like it's all captured in this story. And to then see how can I make a film that sort of makes these things more visible in a humorous way, but also distorts them, confuses us, yeah, I think.
Would you say that you maybe went with the trend? You know, a lot of people say, like, I don't know if you maybe know the series such as Bridgerton, and maybe even about this Ariel, the Little Mermaid. Now everyone was saying, like, why are they played by people of color? Because they didn't exist back then. Or some people even said that mermaids live underwater and the sun can come there. And some were saying, like, yeah, but they're imaginative creatures, so how can you say what color they are? But you even changed the gender of, for example, Robinson Crusoe. It's played by a woman. So why did you decide, for example, on that? Even Friday is also a woman.
Well, as well, race as gender are cultural constructions, and so the way we see what a man is or what a white man is comes very much of how a white man has been represented. So if you look at, I would say, 99% of the films that I have seen growing up always featured white men in the center. So when I was bringing this film again, I was like, what can I do to not feature a white man again in the center? Because what it means is that I give this stage again to a white man. And so, of course, you have this discussions about representation in Disney films, which often end up being quite empty because they are only about the representation itself and not the structure around. Like, I mean, I think The Little Mermaid is still looking up to a prince. I don't know how they constructed this. I haven't seen the film. So I think it's also important to think, of course, about all the structures around. But that was now the intention fully with my film, to try not be moralizing and say it has to be like this and it has to be like that, but rather deconstruct what are these cultural representations that we've been fed, and how can we see them again, because they became just the norm. And as the norm is that we see a white man in a film, people start asking questions when they see a black woman. But if I would have done it with white men, nobody would have asked me this question. Nobody would have thought about it. Why did you bring again a white man? No, probably not. So, but yeah, the incentive was more to be like, how do I establish a new norm, a different norm? I don't just want to turn around things, but I want to create a world where there is different norms. And in this different norm world, everybody is suddenly black, everybody is queer or a woman, or they don't have to be white men.
But you decided to have the same, to use the same names as in the book. How come you didn't decide to change that as well?
Because it was very much about showing these archetypes of the book. So what I saw also in previous versions of Crusoe, because there have been critical versions, was that they try to bring out these, like, sort of ridiculize these archetypes or give more attention to Friday and the native culture of Friday. But it all went sort of past the idea that this book is not based on a reality. This book is based with a certain idea, propagating a certain idea of colonialism, of having the white smart ruler and the black slave. So in any possible way that you try to humanize or ridiculize one of these both characters, you will always bring the same representation of the master and the slave. What was your question again? Because
why did you decide to use the same names as in?
Yeah. So I mean, I brought basically the same story. So my idea was to bring indeed this story again, and so I had no reason to change the names, because it was also, the film is constructed out of all the classical story points that have been in all these retellings of Crusoe. So I'm telling the Crusoe story. I just changed things in casting, in costumes, in environment, but the story points are mainly still there. Yeah,
you put also a lot of focus on let's say, protagonists we don't hear much about in the book. For example, Gio, the goat. I found that very humorous when I came to the chapter of how Gio found out that he has different expectations than his family. Was it something like that? Yes. So you're actually using, this is where I actually asked myself whether you decided to use this sort of very still camera in most of your shots in the film, because you were shooting these goats a lot, and maybe they would be afraid that you would be just like walking around them. Was it hard to shoot that?
Wait, let me reply first to the first part of what you say. So the goats are actually very present in the Crusoe story, but they are made invisible. But Crusoe survives because of the goats. He eats the goats, he milks the goats, he procreates the goats, he captures them. He even wears, his clothes are made of the goat skin. So what I did was just not make the goat invisible, still make it invisible in Crusoe's world, but then switch to this other world where the goat is very present and where we just see the goat's life on the island because they were living there before Crusoe came there. Then to answer your question about shooting, I don't like to shoot in a very complicated way. Generally, I want to tell like straightforward and simple stories. So I only move the camera if it's necessary. So that's more of a general approach I have. And the goats we even follow there is one shot where we follow the goats with the Steadicam. So no, they were actually very nice and friendly goats. We spent 3 days with the goats and they got to know us and we found the right food they liked also. So
what is that?
They mainly like bread, apparently, and grains like linsen.
Well, were they actually doing the sounds already in front of the camera, or you needed to synchronize them afterwards? Because it really, you put the subtitles of their talk there, but was this a post-production or was it shoot on the spot?
No, it was post-production, yes. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they make a sound, but mostly not. No, I had a general idea of where I wanted to go with this goat chapter, but I didn't limit myself to this has to be exactly the story. So it was more we spent 3 days with these goats and we shot certain ideas that we had in that moment. And then in editing, I constructed this little narrative out of it.
So where were you shooting? Is this like a real Robinson Crusoe island, or is it even any close to the original spot?
No, not at all. Like the idea was like this is a European story, so I have to shoot it in Europe. It's also the representation in the story is one of exoticism. Like Defoe also didn't really know the place where he situated this island, so it was also out of reading that he constructed this fake exotic island where nobody lives.
Like Karl May's Winnetou. Like Karl May's Winnetou and similar stories.
Yes, indeed. So I was like, okay, I can choose my own island. So I ended up in Greece. I thought like Greece is the base of our European civilization. So I'll shoot it there. And of course, it also has this connotation of like where a lot of migrants arrive today. And if you would see Crusoe in the light of being a migrant, it would totally give this different perspective on him. So yeah, we shot it mainly in Greece, but the part with the goats we shot in Belgium because the Greek goats were or too wild or too captured. So
you had trained goats?
No, we didn't have trained goats. We had, I would say, a strike of luck just in the French part of Belgium. Through a friend, I found a hill on which 5 goats lived, or 6 goats lived, quite freely. And I didn't have these tags, because normally in Belgium at least you're required to have a tag if you have a goat. And it was beautiful and it looked like Greece. So I was like, okay, wow, exactly what I need. And then we just spent some time there, yes.
But otherwise, the whole other team was from Belgium when you went to Greece, or?
It was mixed. So it was mixed between people from Berlin, Belgium, but we also had Iranian first assistant, a Greek art director team. So yeah, it was a very mixed crew, I'd say.
Well, you didn't need a lot of people for the costumes, I guess. I mean, there are only a couple of people that play in this film. But I was wondering also, Bernice, if I know correctly, the one that plays Friday, is doing sign language. So is she really having problems with hearing, or she learned that especially for the film?
Bernice is deaf, so yeah, she can't hear. So also on the set we had an interpreter to do the talking, but usually when I talk like slow, she could lip read. But yeah, she's actually deaf, so she uses sign language every day. Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, it was very interesting to put that already at the beginning of the story, when actually Friday is telling us the story. I couldn't remember exactly whether it's the same in the book. I don't believe Friday has much to say in the book, right?
No, Friday doesn't have much to say in the book. Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's what I try to bring in this confusion in the story is like, is oppositions also. So you have Friday being on the one hand, the one being enslaved, but on the other hand, wearing this police uniform, which is something we see with authority. And then on the one hand, having nothing to say and also not able to hear or have conversations. But on the other hand, being the one who introduces the story. So yeah, that was just my intention to bring these conflicts. So what I hope would be that if somebody watches the film, it would make them reflect over it.
It sort of seems that what you did with your film is a parodical interpretation of what they're doing in the United States at the moment, where the school boards are just banning a lot of these older books because sometimes either they're racist, chauvinistic, and all of other things, but you're doing it in sort of a humorous way. So do you think maybe this is just the way how you don't moralize, but still can be critical? Because a lot of time when we hear some critics, like, you know, back in the days when there were the only white male authors were writing books, the stories were different. So do you think maybe is it better to put everything in humor, because people won't feel so, you know, like when you feel with your parents if you're a teenager and you just want to be a rebel against whatever they say, no matter what, is just the way you are in the moment. Maybe if you put it in humor, you can get easier to a larger audience. Do you think that is the thing, or?
I wouldn't put it as a general rule, because I don't know, it's the way I approach things, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily the way that is working for everybody. And to come back to on the banning of books, the most books that are being banned at the moment in libraries in the United States is books about being queer, is books about trans people, much less books that would be about progressive, about racism. Or this is happening much less actually. So yeah, I mean, banning, I don't know if it's ever necessarily a good solution, but it's more about not giving it a stage anymore, because, for example, Robinsona Crusoe is a book that was given in education without being critically reflected over, like people had to read it in high school. So yeah, I think in many cases it's better to contextualize instead to just ban. But if you talk about a subject like, for example, statues in public space, yeah, this is honoring somebody, and if you're honoring somebody like Leopold II, which was a king of Belgium, who was responsible of the deaths of many people in Congo and who was the first to colonize Congo, yeah, then you're honoring somebody in public space, and then I think, yes, you can tear down the statue, and no, you don't necessarily have to preserve it because we have thousands of them. So it's a case-by-case thing. Yeah.
So don't burn the book, but read it with a foreword or something.
Or just don't give it any attention anymore. I think like it's maybe time we give attention to different stories and to other books. Yeah.
So your film is going to be screened on Kino Otok together with Georges Méliès's film that is supposed to be the first film interpretation of Robinson Crusoe. Would you say that there are some similarities between your film and Georges Méliès's film?
Well, it's the same story, so yes, there are certainly similarities. What I hope is actually that Méliès's film is the first one that did Crusoe, and I dearly hope that mine is the last version of Crusoe, and that after this we can talk about different different stories and different films. Yes.
But you watched the Georges Méliès film before you did your film, or?
Yes, yeah.
It had no influence on you?
I mean, I watched all the films that were made about Crusoe just to see, because what I was interested in was what are these story points that are coming back, what is the same. Because Crusoe, if you read the original book, it goes in all directions. I mean, it's not a very well-told story in how we imagine a well-told story. It's just side story, other side story goes there. The part that is on an island is not the whole book. So it's a part of the island that has been retold. And then also certain story points of that island. Now the Méliès film is not fully there anymore, so it's 12 minutes or 11 minutes. And I think the Méliès film was originally longer. So it's difficult to see what were the story points at that time. But I seem to remember there was a large part given to Crusoe returning to England and being a hero. And the portrayal of Friday is quite problematic in it as well. But I cannot say that it was thus the film that directly influenced me, no. No.
Okay, to conclude, is this your first time on Kino Otok? You had some short films, maybe you visited festival already then?
No, this is my first time in Kino Otok. My short films were sadly during the COVID period, so I didn't get to visit many festivals.
And your plans for the festivals?
For this festival? For Kino Otok? Yeah. To watch a lot of films, as many as can see, to see the concerts, watch the films outside. Yesterday I already saw a lot of short films outside, which was very nice. And hopefully find the time to also dive in the sea ones. Yes.
Well, Benjamin, I hope you will have time for everything, and we'll see you at the screening.
Thank you very much.
Dragi gledalci, z nami je bil Benjamin Debooserejem z filmom, bom še enkrat prebrala, Življenje in nenavadne prigode Robinsona Crusoeja, ki je 28 let živel povsem sam na naseljenem otoku in pravil, da je njegov. Toliko za danes iz Ad hoca, lepo se imejte in se vidimo.